Get your hands off me. Lily Hayes drove her elbow hard into the man's ribs and spun out of his grip before he could grab her again. She didn't run. She stood her ground right there in the middle of Caldwell's Main Street chest, heaving jaw set, staring down Gerald Pratt like he was nothing more than a bad smell. He outweighed her by 100 pounds and owned half the town. She had 37 cents and a carpet bag. But Lily Hayes had never backed down from anything in her life. She wasn't about to start now. If this story already has your heart beating faster, hit that subscribe button right now and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's get into it. The crowd on Caldwell's Main Street had stopped moving the moment Lily's elbow connected with Gerald Pratt's ribs. That was the thing about small towns. Nobody minded their own business. They just stood there, the blacksmith with his hammer half raised, the women by the dry goods store with their mouths open, the old men outside the barber shop leaning forward in their chairs like they'd been waiting all morning for exactly this kind of entertainment. And Gerald Pratt stood in the middle of it all, one hand pressed to his side, his face gone from red to something closer to purple. "You little—" He bit off the word, reconsidered, smiled instead. That was the worst part. When a man like Gerald Pratt smiled, it meant he'd already decided how badly he was going to make you pay. "You're going to regret that," he said low and easy like they were discussing the weather. "Everything I offered you, the roof, the wages, the position in my house, I'm pulling all of it. You're done in this town, Miss Hayes. Nobody hires a woman who can't keep herself in line." Lily's fingers curled at her sides. She kept her voice flat. "Then I'll find another town." "You won't get 20 miles. He stepped closer. "A woman alone. No money, no references, no family. The territory will eat you alive. I'm the best offer you're ever going to get." He said it like it was a kindness. Like he was doing her a favor by reminding her how small her world was. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her carpet bag, turned her back on him, and walked. She had no destination. She had no plan. She had 37 cents and the clothes on her back and a stubbornness that had carried her 600 miles from a life she'd already left once. She kept walking because stopping meant thinking about how bad things actually were, and she couldn't afford that. Not yet. She made it to the far end of the street before her knees threatened to give. She stopped at the water trough outside the livery stable and gripped the wooden edge with both hands, breathing through her nose, forcing herself steady. She wasn't going to cry. She wasn't going to fall apart on a public street in a town she'd only arrived in 4 days ago. A town that had already decided she wasn't worth anything except what Gerald Pratt had decided to offer. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the most reckless. She turned. He was standing just inside the livery entrance, tall, lean, with the kind of stillness that didn't come from laziness, but from a man who'd learned long ago that most things weren't worth moving fast for. His hat was pulled low. His eyes were steady on her, dark and unreadable, and there was no expression on his face that she could name. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't gloating. He was just watching. "I don't know you," Lily said. "No?" He didn't offer his name. He glanced past her toward the street, toward where Gerald Pratt was still standing with that smile on his face, talking to the two men who'd appeared at his side. Then he looked back at her. "You have somewhere to go. That's not your concern. It's going to become everyone's concern in about 3 minutes," he said quietly. "When Pratt sends those 2 men after you, he owns the sheriff here. You won't make it to the edge of town before someone finds a reason to stop you." Lily's grip tightened on her carpet bag. She'd known Pratt was connected. She hadn't known exactly how connected. "What do you want?" "Nothing from you." He pushed off the wall and straightened. Up close, he was broader than she'd first read him, not a man who sat behind a desk. Someone who worked. Someone who'd spent years doing something hard. "I'm Jake Walker. I run the Walker Ranch 12 miles north. Gerald Pratt has been trying to get his hands on my eastern pasture for 3 years. He paused. "He'd very much like to humiliate me." Lily stared at him. And you just humiliated him in front of the whole town." That makes you someone he's going to want to destroy quietly and quickly before anyone starts thinking a woman can stand up to him and walk away. Another pause. It also makes you someone I'm inclined to help. Temporarily. Why would you help me? Jake Walker looked at her for a moment that stretched long enough to feel like a test. Because I hate Gerald Pratt, he said simply. And because you need it. She almost said no. She came within a breath of picking up that carpet bag and walking straight into whatever disaster was waiting for her on the road out of Caldwell, because she'd spent the last 6 years learning not to trust offers from strangers, especially offers that came from men who looked at her with that kind of calm, measuring attention. But she heard boots on the boardwalk behind her. 2 sets. Moving with purpose. Miss Hayes. Jake Walker's voice was quiet, not urgent, just quiet. Walk with me. She walked with him. He took her in through the back of the livery before the 2 men rounded the corner. She could hear them asking questions of the stable hand. Where'd the woman go? She was just here. And then their voices faded as Jake led her through a side door and into the alley behind. My wagon's at the end, he said. We'll head out before they circle back. You knew my name, Lily said. Before you introduced yourself, you said Miss Hayes. He didn't slow down. I heard Pratt say it, on the street. She let that sit for a moment. What exactly does temporarily mean? It means I'll get you out of town today. You can stay at the ranch. There's a bunkhouse for the women who work the kitchens. You won't be alone. We can figure out the rest from there. Figure out what rest? I'm not looking for charity, Mr. Walker. Good, he said. Because I'm not offering any. I need a cook. My last one left 3 weeks ago, and my men are miserable. He glanced at her sideways. Can you cook? Lily blinked. Yes. Then it's not charity. It's a job. She almost laughed. She didn't. But she almost did. You hire women based on whether they can elbow men in the ribs. I hire people who don't back down, he said. The elbow was a bonus. The ride north was quiet in the way that open country made everything quiet, not peaceful exactly, but wide. Like the land itself was too big to hold small sounds. Lily sat in the wagon bed, because the bench seat was loaded with grain sacks, and Jake Walker drove without talking, which suited her fine, because she needed to think. She thought about Gerald Pratt's face, about the way he'd smiled when he withdrew the offer. He hadn't been angry, not really. He'd been satisfied the way a man was satisfied when he watched a door close on someone who'd tried to escape him. He'd wanted her to understand that he controlled the exits. She thought about the 2 men who'd come looking for her. She thought about the fact that she was now in a wagon with a stranger heading to a ranch 12 miles north of the only town she knew in the whole of Wyoming territory. You're quiet, Jake Walker said. So are you. I'm driving, and I'm thinking. She watched the back of his head. He had good posture for a rancher. Most of the men she'd seen around cattle country had a forward hunched set to their shoulders from years of leaning into wind and work. Jake Walker sat straight. Why does Pratt want your pasture? A pause. Long enough that she thought he might not answer. It borders the water rights I hold on the Caldwell Creek. Whoever controls my eastern fence controls the water for about 60 square miles of grazing land. Pratt wants to push into that territory. He's bought out 4 ranches in 3 years to do it. Another pause. He won't get mine. He'll keep trying. Let him. She studied the line of his jaw. Unreadable. Whatever feeling was behind that answer, and she thought there was plenty, he kept it where she couldn't see it. You're not afraid of him. I didn't say that, Jake said. I said let him try. There was a difference in there, she thought. She just couldn't quite find the shape of it yet. The ranch hands didn't know what to make of her. There were 6 of them, older men, mostly weathered and dusty, the kind who'd been working cattle their whole lives and didn't have a lot of use for conversation. They stared when Jake pulled the wagon in, and they stared harder when Lily climbed down and picked up her carpet bag. "She's the new cook," Jake said. Like that explained everything. It didn't explain anything, but apparently it was all he intended to say. He handed the wagon off to the youngest hand, a boy named Curtis, who couldn't have been more than 17, and who looked at Lily with wide, alarmed eyes, like she was a phenomenon he had no category for. "Ma'am," Curtis said. "Curtis," Lily said. Jake Walker showed her the kitchen. It was functional, and that was the kindest word she had for it. 3 weeks without a cook had taken a toll. The flour bin was low. The larder was a disaster of mismatched supplies, and something had clearly been burned in the pot that was still sitting on the stove. "I'll need supplies," she said. "Make a list. Curtis will take it to Caldwell on Friday." "The men have been cooking for themselves." "Badly," Jake said, and left her to it. She found her footing faster than she expected. She always had. This was the thing about Lily Hayes that most people who looked at her didn't understand. They saw the situation she was in, and they made a judgment about what kind of woman she must be to have arrived there. They didn't see the thing underneath the capability, the focus, the absolute certainty she had that whatever room she was put in, she would figure out how to work it. By the time dinner came around, she had cornbread, salt beef stew, and a dried apple pie built from what she'd salvaged. The ranch hands ate in silence for the first 3 minutes. Then old Roy, who had the most sun-damaged face she'd ever seen on a human being, looked up from his bowl and said, "Lord Almighty, where did you find her, Jake?" Jake was at the head of the table. He didn't look up from his own bowl. She found herself. Lily kept her face neutral. But something in her chest settled just slightly, just a degree for the first time in 4 days. The trouble came on the 3rd morning. She was in the kitchen before dawn starting the bread when she heard horses, more than one, coming fast. She moved to the window without thinking and saw 3 riders coming through the ranch gate. One of them she recognized even at that distance, that particular set of a self-satisfied man on horseback. Gerald Pratt. She heard Jake's boots on the porch. He'd heard them too. "Stay inside," he said loud enough to carry to the kitchen without being meant for the hands. He meant it for her. She stayed, but she moved to where she could hear. "Walker." Pratt's voice carried its usual easy confidence. "Heard you'd picked up a stray." "Heard wrong." Jake's voice was flat and cool. "I hired a cook. Funny thing." Pratt's horse shifted. She could hear the leather creak. "Woman I'm looking for, she worked for me briefly. Left under difficult circumstances. I've got questions for her. Legal questions. Be a shame if the sheriff got involved." A beat of silence. "You're welcome to bring the sheriff," Jake said. "When he has actual papers, I'll talk to him. Until then, you're trespassing." "Jake." Pratt's voice dropped. The pretense went lower, went mean. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The woman's not worth it. She's got a history. You don't know what you've brought onto your land." "Get off my property, Gerald." Another silence. Longer this time. "You'll regret this," Pratt said. Same as he'd said to Lily. Same easy, terrible promise. "Add it to my list," Jake said. The horses turned. She heard them ride out. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, and turned back to the bread dough, pressing into it with both hands, working it hard, because her hands needed something to do. She heard the porch boards creak as Jake stepped inside. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. She didn't turn around. "Whatever history he said you had." Jake said, "I don't need to know it. It's yours." Her hands went still in the dough. She turned then, slowly. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, watching her with that same dark, level gaze that gave away nothing and somehow said everything. He'd just turned Gerald Pratt away from his door. He'd done it without asking her a single question. "Why?" she said. "Because a man who threatens a woman to get what he wants isn't asking a legal question," Jake said. "He's applying pressure, and I don't negotiate with pressure." She looked at him for a long moment. "He's going to come back." "Yes." "With the sheriff." "Probably." And when the sheriff comes and starts asking questions about who I am and why I'm here, she stopped. She hadn't thought this far ahead. She'd been so focused on getting through each hour that she hadn't calculated past it. They're going to want to know why you'd take in a strange woman, a woman who just publicly defied Gerald Pratt. That story. She heard how it sounded even as she said it. That story looks suspicious unless there's a reason that makes sense. Jake was quiet. She saw him thinking. Watched something cross his face, something that wasn't comfortable, something he was working around. The only reason a man takes a woman in without question, she said slowly, the only reason nobody asks too hard is if she's his. The kitchen went very still. His wife, Lily said. Jake uncrossed his arms, set his jaw, said nothing. I'm not suggesting... She shook her head. I know this is your land and your house, and I don't have any standing here. I know that. I'm just telling you what the math looks like from where I'm standing. If Pratt comes back with a sheriff, and I'm just the cook, there's nothing protecting me from whatever story Pratt decides to tell. But if I'm your wife, pretend to be my wife, Jake said. It came out rough, like the words had scraped something on the way up. He wasn't looking at her now. He was looking at the wall just past her left shoulder, and his expression had gone somewhere closed and private that she couldn't follow. That's what you're saying. Yes, Lily said. That's what I'm saying. The silence stretched between them like a thing with weight. I swore I'd never... He stopped himself, pressed his lips together, tried again. There are things you don't know about me, Miss Hayes. There are things you don't know about me either, she said. We're even. He looked at her then, really looked at her. Not the measuring assessment from the livery yard, not the careful watching from across the dinner table. Something more direct than that. Something that felt uncomfortably like he was looking for the answer to a question he hadn't yet decided how to ask. Pretending is lying, he said finally. Even with a purpose. I need you to understand I know that. So do I. And when this is done, when Pratt backs off, or we find another way to deal with him, it ends. Clean. No claims, no complications. Agreed. And you stay on as cook, he said. A real job. Real wages. This doesn't change that. Agreed, she said again. He nodded. Once. The way a man nodded when he'd settled a business arrangement he wasn't entirely sure was wise. Then we'd better get our story straight before anyone else rides up that road. Lily turned back to the bread dough. Her heart was hammering against her ribs loud enough that she half expected him to hear it. But her hands were steady. They were always steady. We met 6 months ago, she said. When you were in Denver on business, we corresponded. I came out to marry you. Keep it simple, Jake said. He sounded like a man steeling himself. Simple stories hold together better. Simple it is. She heard him push off the doorframe and walk back out to the porch. She heard the hands calling to each other across the yard. She heard the ordinary sounds of the morning resuming as if nothing had shifted, as if the entire geometry of her situation hadn't just changed shape entirely. She pressed her palms into the dough and breathed. Pretend to be my wife. He'd said it like the words cost him something, like they'd come out of a place that had been locked for a long time, and opening it even slightly, even for pretend, was something that required deliberate, painful effort. She wondered what had put that lock there. She wondered, and then she stopped herself firmly, because that kind of wondering was a door she had no business opening. This was an arrangement, a practical solution to a dangerous problem. Nothing more. She told herself that clearly. She told herself that completely. She almost believed it. That afternoon, Jake Walker walked into town with Lily Hayes at his side and told 3 people, the postmaster, the dry goods owner, and the woman who ran the boarding house, that he'd gotten married quietly weeks ago, and that his wife had arrived to settle in at the ranch. He said it without flourish, without embellishment. The way he said everything like it was a fact, and facts didn't require decoration. And because Jake Walker was Jake Walker, a man who'd never given the town a reason to doubt his word, they believed him, every last one of them. She watched it happen and felt something she couldn't entirely name. Not triumph, not relief. Something more complicated than either. Something that felt faintly and uncomfortably like the first step in a direction she hadn't chosen and couldn't yet see the end of. By the time they rode back to the ranch, the story had already started moving through Caldwell, the way stories did in small towns, fast, eager, and slightly embellished at every telling. By the time Gerald Pratt heard it, Lily Hayes was already Mrs. Jake Walker. And somehow, impossibly, that changed everything. The story Gerald Pratt heard was not the story Jake had told. That was the nature of small towns. By the time a piece of news passed through 4 mouths, it had grown limbs it wasn't born with. What Jake had said plainly, that he'd married quietly, that his wife had arrived to settle in, had become, by the time it reached Pratt's ears, something louder. Something that implied Jake Walker had a woman at his side, now a woman who'd publicly defied Gerald Pratt and walked away, and that Jake had made her untouchable. Lily knew this because Curtis told her. Curtis, who was 17 and incapable of keeping information to himself when he was nervous, came into the kitchen the next morning with wide eyes and the look of a boy who'd been sitting on news all night. "Mr. Pratt was at the saloon last night," he said, setting down the firewood in a pile that was slightly less organized than usual. "Roy heard it from the barkeep. He wasn't happy, ma'am, about the marriage." "I'd imagine not," Lily said. She kept her attention on the skillet. "He said—" Curtis hesitated. "He said it wasn't legal, the marriage. He said there was no record of it anywhere, and that somebody ought to look into that." The skillet handle got a little tighter in her grip. "Did he? Roy thinks he's going to go to the county clerk, to check." Lily set the skillet down, turned around. Curtis flinched slightly, which wasn't her intention, but the boy read emotion on faces better than most adults twice his age. "Where's Mr. Walker?" "North fence. There was a break in the line this morning. He went out at first light." She pulled off her apron. "Tell Roy to watch the eggs." She found Jake 1.5 miles out, remounting after checking a section of fence that had been pulled clean out of the ground. Not broken pulled. She saw it in his face before he said a word. "This wasn't weather," he said. "No," she agreed. "Curtis told me about Pratt, the county clerk." Jake looked at the fence post in his hand. Set it down with a deliberateness that she was already learning to read. It was the way he handled his anger, moving it into his hands and then setting it somewhere controlled. "He won't find anything irregular. The arrangement is it's not on record anywhere, which is the same as not existing," Lily said. "Which is what Pratt is going to argue. That there's no marriage. That I'm here under false pretenses. That whatever he decides to say about me and my history is uncontested." She looked at him steadily. "We have to fix that." A pause, long and loaded. "You're talking about a real record," Jake said. "I'm talking about going to the justice of the peace and filing the paperwork that makes this legal on paper." She kept her voice level, practical, the way she kept everything when the ground was unsteady. "It doesn't change what this is. It doesn't change the terms. It just means Gerald Pratt can't pull a record and call us liars." Jake was quiet for long enough that she heard the wind and nothing else. "You understand what that means," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "It means legally on paper we are married. Yes. It means getting unmarried later requires a legal process. I know what a divorce is, Mr. Walker." He looked at her sharply. Something moved in his expression, not quite amusement, not quite anything she had a word for. He looked away. "I had a fiancée," he said. Flat. No lead-up, like he'd decided to say the thing and was just going to say it. 3 years ago. Her name was Catherine. We were 6 weeks from the wedding when she left. Went back east with a man who had more money and a softer life. He picked up the fence post again, set it against the wire. I swore after that I'd never let a woman get legal claim to anything I'd built. Lily said nothing. She gave him the silence because she could see he needed it. "That was the rule," he said. "No marriage, no legal entanglement, not again." "I'm not Catherine," Lily said. "No." He looked at her. "You're not." And I'm not asking for your ranch. I'm asking for a piece of paper that keeps Gerald Pratt from destroying both of us." She held his gaze. "One piece of paper, one record at the clerk's office, that's all." He drove the post into the ground with one hard push. "We go Friday," he said, "when Curtis takes the supply list." "Thank you," she said. He didn't answer. He just picked up the next post and moved down the line, and Lily turned and walked back toward the ranch, and neither of them said what they were both clearly thinking, that what had started as a practical arrangement had just taken one more step toward something neither of them had planned for. The hands noticed. She couldn't prevent it. Roy noticed everything and said half of what he noticed, and stored the rest, which was somehow more alarming than a man who simply talked too much. He watched Jake at dinner on Wednesday, watched the way Jake's eyes moved to Lily when she wasn't looking, and moved away before she turned, and he said absolutely nothing. But when Lily passed him the cornbread, he nodded at her with an expression that contained more understanding than she was comfortable with from a man she'd known 4 days. Old Roy had opinions. He just saved them for the right moment. That moment came Thursday evening when she was alone in the kitchen and he appeared in the doorway with his hat in his hands, which meant he'd decided to be polite, which meant whatever he was about to say was significant. "You know what happened to this place before you got here?" he asked. "The cook left," Lily said. 3 cooks in 2 years, Roy said. "The one before that lasted 6 weeks. The one before her left after the first winter." He turned his hat in his hands. "It's not the work that drives them out." Lily kept her hands moving. "What drives them out?" "Jake," Roy said simply. He's not cruel. He's not a hard man in the way that hurts people. But after Catherine, he shut every door. Every room in himself that a person might walk through locked. And after a while, being around a man who's locked every door gets lonely. People leave." He paused. "He let you in the front gate, Mrs. Walker. First time in 3 years he let anyone through the front gate." Lily's hands went still. "I'm just the cook," she said. Roy put his hat back on. "Yes, ma'am," he said with the exact tone of a man who believed nothing of the kind. He left her standing there with her hands still and her mind running in 6 directions at once. Friday came like a verdict. They rode into Caldwell side by side, and Lily felt the town watching them the way she always felt a crowd's attention, as a physical thing, like pressure. She kept her chin level and her hands in her lap, and reminded herself that she'd survived worse audiences than a Wyoming frontier town. The justice of the peace was a compact, cheerful man named Harold Fitch, who did land surveys on the side and seemed genuinely delighted to have something interesting come through his door. He looked at them both across his desk with bright, inquisitive eyes. "Heard you'd married quiet," he said to Jake. "We did," Jake said. He'd decided somewhere on the ride in to stop qualifying, to simply state things and let them stand. "Want to make it official in the records?" "That's why we're here." Harold Fitch got out his ledger, asked the questions. Jake answered them one by one in that flat, factual voice, and Lily answered hers, and Harold wrote everything down with a scratchy, careful hand, and then looked up at both of them with his pen still poised. "I do need 2 signatures," he said. "And I need to note for the record." He glanced between them. Are both parties entering this willingly? The question landed differently than Harold intended it to. Lily felt it. Jake felt it too. She saw his jaw tighten just slightly. "Yes," Lily said. "Yes," Jake said. Harold nodded and turned the ledger around. They signed their names side by side in Harold Fitch's ledger, and when Lily lifted the pen and saw the 2 names together, Jake Walker. Lily Walker. Something happened in her chest that she hadn't expected and couldn't immediately explain. She was still thinking about it when they walked out. "He'll hear about this before we're clear of town," Jake said, meaning Pratt. "Let him," Lily said. Jake glanced at her. The corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile, but the closest thing to one she'd seen on him yet. It lasted about 2 seconds, and then it was gone, and he was looking straight ahead again, unreadable. But she'd seen it. She filed it away. Pratt didn't wait long. He came to the ranch the following morning with the sheriff. This time a man named Aldous Beak, who had the look of someone who'd made one too many compromises and was too tired to feel bad about it anymore. Beak hung back while Pratt did the talking, which told Lily everything about whose errand this actually was. Jake stepped off the porch to meet them. Lily stayed on the porch, which was both practically safer and a statement she wasn't hiding inside, but she wasn't standing at Jake's shoulder either. She stood where she could be seen and heard without being in anyone's way. "I heard you went to Fitch," Pratt said. The easy smile was gone. "Interesting timing on that." "Paperwork takes time," Jake said. "We got to it when we got to it. The thing is," Pratt said, "I had a conversation with a man in Cheyenne last week, a man who used to employ Lily Hayes." He let that settle. He was watching her face as he said it the way a card player watched the table. A man named Howard Vance. Lily's blood went cold. She didn't let it touch her face. "He had some things to say," Pratt continued. "About Miss Hayes, about her character, her tendency to involve herself with men of property." He paused for effect. "Her tendency to make claims." "My wife," Jake said, "doesn't make claims. She has a name on a legal document and a home on my property. You're talking about her on my land, Gerald." I'd choose the next few words carefully. "She worked for Vance for 8 months," Pratt said, ignoring him, still watching Lily. "Left under circumstances. He'd be very interested to know where she ended up." "Then give him my address," Lily said. The words came out before she'd made the decision to speak. She felt Jake's attention shift to her sharply. Pratt blinked. "Tell Howard Vance exactly where I am," she said. She kept her voice level, kept it clean. "Tell him I'm married to Jake Walker of Walker Ranch, Caldwell County. Tell him I have a legal record and a lawful husband, and that anything he'd like to say about my character, he can say to a judge in open court, where I will be there to answer him." The silence that followed had a particular quality to it, the quality of a moment that had gone somewhere unexpected. Pratt's jaw moved. "You're not afraid of him?" "No," Lily said. "I'm not afraid of men who only have power over women who have nowhere to go." She held his gaze. "I have somewhere to go." Pratt looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Jake. Something passed between the two men that was older than this morning, older than the fence break and the county clerk and all of it, the particular look of two men who had been going at each other for years over land and water rights, and now had found a new axis for the same war. "This isn't finished," Pratt said. "It never is with you," Jake said. Pratt turned his horse. Beak followed without making eye contact with anyone. They rode out. Lily gripped the porch rail with both hands. She waited until the sound of hooves faded before she let herself breathe properly. Jake came up the porch steps. He stopped beside her, not facing her, both of them looking out at the empty yard. "Howard Vance," he said. Not a question. She'd known this was coming. "Yes." "You going to tell me?" She considered that. She owed him something. Not everything, but something. The arrangement had just gotten more complicated, and he deserved to understand the shape of the complication, even if she kept the details her own. "He was a man I worked for in Denver. Household manager. I left because he..." She stopped. Chose words. "He decided my position in the house included more than I'd agreed to. When I refused, he told people things that weren't entirely true and weren't entirely false, and were arranged to make me look like a woman who couldn't be trusted." She paused. That's the history Pratt was threatening to use. Jake said nothing for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was very quiet. "Did he hurt you?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. Men didn't ask that question as a rule. Not directly. They talked around it or past it, or pretended it wasn't the real question at the center of things. "Not the way you mean," she said. "But yes." Another silence. "Then when Vance shows up," Jake said, "and he will show up because Pratt will make sure of it, you won't be facing him alone." Lily turned her head. Jake was still looking at the yard, his jaw set. his hands resting on the rail. He wasn't looking at her. He wasn't trying to catch her eye or measure her reaction. He was just saying it the way he said most things, like a fact. Something in her chest moved in a way she didn't have immediate words for. "Jake," she said. First time she'd used his given name. It came out before she realized, and she couldn't quite take it back. He turned then, looked at her. "Thank you," she said. He held her gaze for 3 long seconds. Then he nodded once and went back inside. She stood on the porch and listened to the ordinary sounds of the ranch rebuilding around the silence Pratt had left, and she thought about Roy's words from the night before. Every door locked. 3 cooks in 2 years. First time anyone through the front gate. She told herself it didn't mean anything particular. She told herself that twice. That evening at dinner, Roy told a story about a cattle drive he'd done 15 years back, and the table was louder than Lily had yet heard it. Curtis, laughing at something with his whole body the way only 17-year-olds laughed completely and without reservation. Jake sat at the head of the table and said very little the way he always did. But once, just once, he caught Lily's eye across the table when Curtis knocked over his water glass and made an absolute disaster of recovering from it, and she saw the thing in Jake's expression that she'd seen for 2 seconds on the walk from Fitch's office. That almost smile. Gone again in an instant. But there. She looked back down at her plate and reminded herself very firmly about the terms of their arrangement. Clean. No complications. She'd agreed. She'd agreed because she'd meant it, because she'd meant every sensible word of it, because she was a woman who understood the difference between what was real and what was temporary. The problem was that the almost smile didn't feel temporary. And neither, if she was being entirely honest, did any of the rest of it. Howard Vance was coming. Pratt was circling. The legal record that was supposed to protect them both was a real signature in a real ledger, and the name Lily Walker was written in her own handwriting next to Jake's, and she hadn't been able to stop thinking about that for 3 days. She cleared the plates and told herself to stop thinking about it. She was still thinking about it when she heard the rider come through the gate at full speed an hour after dark. Not Pratt's measured approach, not the sheriff's reluctant amble, but someone moving fast with urgency. And she heard Curtis shout, and Jake's boots hit the floor, and she knew without being told that whatever had been circling them for the past week had just arrived. The rider was a boy, not Curtis, someone younger, maybe 14, from the Halverson place 3 miles east. He was breathing hard and his horse was lathered, and he kept looking over his shoulder even after he'd pulled up in the yard, like whatever was behind him had followed him all the way. "Mr. Walker." He grabbed Jake's arm with both hands, which was the kind of thing a boy did when he'd forgotten to be careful. "My daddy sent me. There's men on your south fence, 4 of them, maybe 5. They've got wire cutters, and Daddy said he saw Pratt's man Devlin riding with them." Jake went very still. "How long ago?" he said. "Hour. Maybe less. I rode fast as I could." Jake turned. Roy was already there, had materialized from the bunkhouse, the way old cowboys materialized when they felt trouble coming through the ground before anyone announced it. Jake looked at him, and something passed between them that didn't need words. "Get the men," Jake said, quietly. Roy went. Jake looked at the boy. "You ride back to your daddy, and you tell him to stay inside tonight. Lock the doors. This is not his fight." He pressed something into the boy's hand coins. Lily couldn't see how many, and the boy wheeled his horse and went. Lily had come out onto the porch when she heard the commotion. She'd stood back because it wasn't her place to step into the middle of it, and she knew that. But Jake turned and looked directly at her now, and whatever he saw in her face made him cross the yard to the porch steps without hesitating. "If we lose the south fence," he said, "Pratt has a clear argument that my boundary line was never maintained. It's the oldest trick in property law. Cut the fence weight claim, the land was abandoned and uncontested." His voice was low and fast, the most words she'd heard him say in a single stretch. "I need to ride out there." "I know," Lily said. "I need you to—" He stopped. She watched him work through something behind his eyes. "I need you to go to Roy's wife in the bunkhouse annex and stay there until I'm back. I'll be fine in the main house. "You'll be fine in the annex," he said with a firmness that wasn't harsh, but was absolutely not negotiable. "Devlin doesn't work alone, and I don't know who else Pratt sent. Main house is visible, the annex isn't." She looked at him. "Be careful," she said. It came out quieter than she intended, more direct. He heard the difference. She saw it in the fraction of a second where something moved in his expression before he locked it down. "Always," he said. And then he was gone, moving across the yard with Roy, and two of the other hands' horses already being brought out of the livery, and Lily stood on the porch and watched them ride into the dark, and told herself that the tight, sick feeling in her chest was just common sense concern for the situation. She almost believed that, too. Roy's wife was a small, sharp-eyed woman named Dorothea, who had the manner of someone who'd seen every variety of frontier trouble and classified most of it as tedious. She let Lily in without ceremony, pushed a cup of coffee at her, and sat down across the table with her mending. "He's ridden into worse," Dorothea said. She didn't look up from her needle. "Jake Walker has been fighting Gerald Pratt over one thing or another for 3 years. He knows how to handle it." "I know," Lily said. "You don't look like you know." Lily wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "Does it ever get easier?" Waiting. Dorothea finally looked up. She studied Lily for a moment with those sharp eyes, the way a woman studied another woman when she was deciding how much credit to extend. "No," she said. "But you get better at what to do with your hands while you do it." She held up her mending. "Roy bought me the worst quality thread available in Wyoming territory. Keeps me busy for hours." Lily laughed, a real one, short and surprised. It felt strange in her chest the way laughing did when you'd been holding tension for too long. Dorothea smiled, went back to her mending. "Roy told me about you," she said. "I imagine he did. He said Jake met you in town and brought you straight home and told Gerald Pratt to get off his land 3 times in the same week." She paused. "Roy's been working for Jake Walker for 11 years. He's never seen him move fast on anything personal. Only on things that threaten the ranch." Lily was quiet. "He's saying," Dorothea said very gently, "that you might be both." The coffee cup was warm in Lily's hands, and she stared into it and didn't have a single thing to say that wouldn't be either a lie or a door she wasn't ready to open. So she said nothing, and Dorothea let her say nothing, and they sat in the easy quiet of two women who both understood that some things didn't need to be spoken to be known. Jake came back 2 hours later. She heard the horses in the yard, and she was out of the annex before Dorothea could say anything, moving across the dark yard toward the sound. She pulled up short when she saw him. Jake dismounting, Roy beside him, both of them intact. No one bleeding that she could immediately see. "Well," she said. "We caught them before they finished," Jake said. He was tired. She could hear it in his voice. A flatness that wasn't his usual flatness, but the kind that came from adrenaline dropping out of a body all at once. "Got about 40 yards of fence cut. Devlin ran when he saw us coming. Left 2 hired men behind." He glanced at Roy. "Sheriff Beek is going to have a productive morning." "You're holding them," Lily said. "Locked in the grain store until first light, then Beek can sort it out." He looked at her. "You should sleep." "You should too." "I'll be in shortly." He turned to say something to Roy, and Lily went back inside, back to the main house, and she was standing in the kitchen, reheating what was left of the coffee, when she heard his boots on the porch, and then the door. And then he was in the kitchen doorway looking at her across the room, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "He's escalating," Lily said. "This isn't just pressure anymore. He cut your fence with hired men. That's destruction of property." "Yes. Beek won't do anything useful. He'll take the 2 men and let them go by noon." "Yes. So what's the actual plan, Jake?" She turned to face him fully. "Because Pratt is not going to stop. He's going to keep cutting and filing and threatening until something gives. Either your fence or your nerve or—" She stopped. "Or he finds something he can use against me that's strong enough to pull the whole arrangement apart." Jake crossed the kitchen and poured himself coffee. He stood with his back against the counter. "I've been thinking about that," he said. "And the water rights document," he said. "The original filing from my father's time. It's registered in Cheyenne, but there's a secondary claim issue that Pratt's been circling. He's been trying to get a county judge to reopen the filing and argue that the boundaries were improperly surveyed." He looked at his coffee. If he can get a sympathetic judge and an argument about an unmarried man's estate management, the kind of argument that implies instability, bad character, he might actually get it reopened. Lily's mind moved fast. But a married man with a stable household and a legal record is a much harder target, Jake finished. "Yes." She stared at him. "You knew that," she said. "When you agreed to the arrangement. You knew it would make the water rights harder to challenge." He met her eyes. "I suspected it." Something shifted in her chest. Not anger exactly. Something more complicated. "You used me," she said. "No." His voice was immediate and firm. "No, Lily. I got you out of town because Pratt's men were 20 seconds behind you, and I would have done that for anyone he was targeting. The rest of it, the arrangement, the record, that was your idea. I agreed because it helped both of us. That's not the same as using you." She held his gaze. He held hers back, and the thing she'd been learning about Jake Walker in the 10 days she'd known him was that he didn't look away when it mattered. Men who lied looked away. Jake Walker met the hard things straight on. "All right," she said. "Then we're honest with each other." "We're honest," he agreed. "Then honestly, what's your plan for Pratt?" He was quiet for a moment. "There's a circuit judge coming through Caldwell in 3 weeks. Judge Harold Crane from Cheyenne. He's not in Pratt's pocket. If I can get the water rights dispute in front of Crane before Pratt gets it in front of someone else, I win. But I need to make sure nothing Pratt has on either of us gives Crane a reason to question my credibility." He paused. "Which means whatever Vance is bringing has to be neutralized first," Lily said. "Yes." She turned her coffee cup in her hands. "I'll need to tell you about Vance. All of it." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," she said. "I'm choosing to, because if you're going to fight Pratt on my behalf in front of a circuit judge, you need to know exactly what you're fighting." Jake set down his cup. He pulled out a chair from the kitchen table and sat down. He folded his hands on the table, and he looked at her and waited, and she understood that this was what Roy had meant, this quality in Jake Walker, of stillness, of making room, of not filling silence with himself when someone else needed to use it. She sat down across from him and told him about Howard Vance. She told him the parts she'd never told anyone. Not the summarized version she'd given him on the porch, the full version, the one where she'd taken the position in Denver, desperate for steady work, after her aunt died and left her with nothing. Where she'd been good at the job, genuinely good. Good enough that Vance had started treating her as indispensable, which was only a short road to treating her as owned. She told him about the night Vance had come to her room and what had happened, and what hadn't happened, because she'd fought and made enough noise that his wife in the next room had heard, and how Vance had spent the following 3 months methodically dismantling her reputation in Denver, so that when she left into a city that had been told a version of her that made it impossible to find other work. She told it plainly. She didn't ask for sympathy, and she didn't perform the parts that were hard. She just told it the way it was. Jake listened to every word. When she finished, there was a silence that wasn't empty, but full. The kind of silence a man sat in when he was doing something with what he'd heard, filing it into the right places, understanding the shape of it. "He's going to come here," Jake said. "Yes, and he's going to say you made advances toward him, that you tried to use him, and when it failed, you made claims." That's the version he's been telling. "It's the version Pratt is paying him to repeat," Jake said. His voice had gone to a particular register, quiet and even and absolutely cold, that she hadn't heard before. How many people in Denver heard Vance's story? Enough. She paused. But there was one person who didn't believe it, his wife. Jake looked up. His wife, Margaret Vance? Lily held his gaze. She heard enough that night to know the truth. She never said so publicly, because Vance controlled everything she had. But she knew. She paused. She slipped me a letter when I left. Told me that if I ever needed a witness, she would... She stopped. She said she would find her courage if I found a place safe enough to use it. Something moved in Jake's expression. Do you still have the letter? In my carpet bag. I've carried it for 4 months. He was quiet. She could see him thinking that particular focused stillness that meant his mind was moving very fast behind a very calm exterior. A circuit judge, he said slowly. In 3 weeks. A letter from the wife's sworn testimony if she'll give it your account on the record. He paused. It's not just about Pratt anymore. No, Lily said. We could put Vance in front of Crane, formally. Make Pratt's witness into a liability instead of an asset. His eyes were sharp now, that cold quality reshaping into something harder and more purposeful. If Vance goes on record, and then Margaret Vance contradicts him under oath, Pratt loses his weapon, Lily said. And exposes himself, Jake said. Because bringing Vance here coordinating with him against you, that's not a property dispute anymore. That's conspiracy to defraud. A judge like Crane takes that seriously. Lily's hands had gone still on the table. She was watching his face. You'd do that, she said. Go that far, for me. He looked at her across the table, and the lamp between them cast light and shadow in equal measure, and his expression in that moment was the most unguarded she'd seen it. Not soft exactly, because nothing about Jake Walker was soft, but open. Like one of Roy's locked doors had swung a few inches, and whatever was behind it was choosing whether to step through. We're in this together, he said. That's what honest means. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the hands had settled. The horses were quiet. The ranch breathed around them the way a place breathed at 2 a.m, when the trouble had passed for the night. Lily looked at him for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, When did it stop feeling like pretending? He went very still. She hadn't planned to say it. It had simply come out the way honest things did when you'd been careful for too long, and she couldn't call it back, and she wasn't sure she wanted to. Jake didn't look away. He didn't answer immediately. He sat with the question the way he sat with everything, fully without flinching. And then slowly he said, Earlier than I'm comfortable admitting. The air between them did something she had no practical language for. Jake, she started. Don't, he said, not harshly, carefully. Not tonight. We're both tired and there's too much still in motion and I... He stopped. Pressed his lips together. Tried again. I need to think about what I'm feeling before I say it out loud. Because when I say things, I mean them. And I need to be sure. She understood that. Probably better than anyone could have. All right, she said. He stood, picked up his cup, looked at her one more time with that open, careful expression. Get some sleep, Lily. You too, she said. He went. She sat at the kitchen table and listened to his footsteps move through the house, listened to a door close quietly somewhere in the back, and she sat with her hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee, and felt the particular terror of a woman who had spent years keeping herself in motion, always moving, always practical, always focused on the next thing that needed doing, and had run out of motion and found herself sitting very still with a feeling she could no longer outrun. The letter from Margaret Vance arrived 2 days later. Not from Denver, from a town called Rawlins, 40 miles south, which meant Margaret Vance had not stayed in Denver after all, which meant something had changed for her too since Lily had left. Lily read it standing in the kitchen with the envelope still in her hand, and by the second paragraph her hand was shaking, and by the end she was sitting down because her legs had made the decision before her mind did. She heard Jake come in from the yard. He stopped when he saw her face. What is it? He said. She held out the letter. He read it in the same silence he did everything. But she watched his expression cross from neutral to intent, to something that looked in a man who almost never showed alarm, like genuine alarm. She's here, Lily said. In Wyoming. She left Vance 2 months ago and she's in Rawlins and she... Her voice caught. She cleared it. She says Vance is coming. He got Pratt's message and he's coming. But she says she'll testify, formally, in front of any judge I put in front of her." She paused. "She says she's been waiting for somewhere safe enough." Jake lowered the letter. He looked at her. "Then she'll have it," he said. "She'll come here." "Jake, she's a woman alone in Rawlins with no—" "Curtis can ride to Rawlins in a day," Jake said. "He'll bring her back. She'll stay in the main house, she'll be safe here, and she'll have a statement in front of Crane before Vance gets close enough to do any damage." He said it like it was simple. He said it the way he said everything he'd already decided, like a fact, like something that was already true, and just needed the rest of the world to catch up to it. Lily stared at him. "You're bringing a stranger into your home to protect me." "I'm bringing a witness who can dismantle a man who's been lying about my wife," Jake said. "That's not generosity. That's strategy." She knew he was using the word carefully. She knew he meant the legal definition. But she also heard the other thing in it, the quiet, deliberate claim in the word wife. And she thought about what he'd said 2 nights ago. "Earlier than I'm comfortable admitting." "All right," she said. For the 3rd time since she'd met him, she said all right and meant every weight of it. "Send Curtis." Jake nodded. He handed her back the letter. His fingers brushed hers on the edge of the paper brief, and unintentional, and neither of them acknowledged it, and the not acknowledging was somehow louder than anything they'd actually said. He went to find Curtis. She stood in the kitchen and held Margaret Vance's letter, and understood with the particular clarity that came from having run out of the ability to lie to herself that the arrangement she'd agreed to clean, no complications, temporary, was none of those things anymore. It hadn't been for a while. And in 3 weeks, when Howard Vance rode into Caldwell with Gerald Pratt's backing, and his careful lies, and his plan to destroy everything she'd built here, she was going to have to stand in front of a circuit judge and tell the truth about all of it. Every part of it, including the parts she hadn't yet found words for. Curtis brought Margaret Vance back in a day and a half. She was not what Lily had expected, which was foolish. She'd known Margaret Vance only through one letter and through the sounds of a woman's footsteps on the other side of a wall on the worst night of Lily's life. She'd built a picture in her mind, without meaning to. The picture was wrong. Margaret Vance was 52 years old, broad-shouldered with gray at both temples, and the look of someone who had recently put down something very heavy and was still getting used to walking without the weight. She climbed down from the wagon. Curtis pulled into the yard, and she looked at Lily, and she didn't say anything for a moment, just looked. Then she said, "You look better than I feared." "You look better than I hoped," Lily said. Margaret Vance made a sound that was half laugh and half something older and more tired. "Howard told everyone I'd gone to visit my sister. He hasn't told anyone the truth yet, because the truth makes him look like a fool." She paused. "That won't last. When he gets here, he'll have a story ready." "He's already on his way," Jake said. He'd come out of the barn when he heard the wagon. Margaret looked at him with the sharp assessing gaze of a woman who'd spent 23 years married to one kind of man and was still calibrating what other kinds looked like. "You're the husband," she said. "Jake Walker," he said. "She needs you to be exactly what you appear to be, Mr. Walker," Margaret said. It wasn't a threat. It was simply direct in the way of a woman who'd used up her lifetime supply of indirectness. "I came here because Lily trusted you. I need to know that trust is well placed." Jake held her gaze. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "It is." Margaret Vance looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then she nodded once the way people nodded when they'd made a decision they intended to keep and turned back to Lily. "Howard will be in Caldwell within the week. Pratt's been sending him money travel expenses, he calls it. What he means is he's been paying Howard to come here and lie under oath." She paused. "I have letters. Howard's letters to Pratt and Pratt's replies. I took them when I left." The yard went very quiet. "You have the correspondence," Jake said slowly, "between Pratt and Vance." 17 letters, Margaret said, going back 8 months, long before Lily ever arrived in Caldwell. She looked at Lily. He was already looking for something to use against Walker. You became available." Lily heard that land, felt the particular cold clarity of understanding that she hadn't been a coincidence in this. She'd been a resource Pratt had identified and developed. Her defiance in the street had accelerated his plan, but the plan had existed before she'd arrived. "Gerald Pratt," Jake said, and his voice was very quiet, "has been running this from the beginning." "For the water rights," Margaret said. "Howard told me everything. He talks when he thinks he's won. He thought he'd won when you left Denver Lily. He told me everything." She reached into the bag over her shoulder and produced a tied bundle of envelopes. Every letter, every arrangement, every payment. She held it out to Jake. "I believe you know a circuit judge." Jake took the bundle. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Lily, and what she saw in his face was not triumph. It was something more careful than that. Something that understood the difference between having a weapon and knowing what it cost the person who'd handed it to you. "Margaret," he said, "you're safe here, for as long as you need." Margaret Vance nodded. She looked like a woman who'd forgotten what safe felt like and was taking a moment to recognize it. "Thank you, Mr. Walker." "Jake," he said. She almost smiled. "Jake?" Roy read the letters that evening. Jake trusted Roy's judgment the way most men trusted no one's completely and without conditions, and Roy read through the bundle at the kitchen table with his jaw getting progressively tighter, and his expression going somewhere that Lily could only describe as a man arriving at the end of his patience with the human race. "He's been paying county commissioners," Roy said. "Not just the sheriff. There are 3 names here, 2 commissioners and a surveyor, all on Pratt's payroll. He's been building the case to challenge the water rights filing for over a year." He set the letters down. "This isn't a property dispute, Jake. This is organized fraud." "I know," Jake said. "Crane needs to see all of this." "He will." Jake looked at the bundle. "But we need to be careful about how we bring it. If we walk into Crane's court with letters from a woman who left her husband and traveled alone to make accusations, Pratt's lawyer will spend the first hour attacking Margaret's credibility instead of looking at the evidence." He paused. "We need Crane to see the letters before the hearing. Privately, with someone whose credibility Pratt can't easily challenge." Roy and Lily both looked at him. "Who?" Roy said. "Reverend Aldous," Jake said. "He's been in Caldwell for 20 years. He baptized half the county. When Crane passes through, Aldous is always his first stop." He paused. "If Aldous presents the letters to Crane informally as a community concern, a matter of civic integrity, Crane comes into the hearing already knowing the shape of things. Pratt won't even see it coming." Lily stared at him. "You've been thinking about this for days." "Since the fence," Jake said. He looked at her evenly. "I told you I'd handle Pratt. I meant it." Roy picked up his coffee cup. "I'll ride to Aldous first thing tomorrow." "I'll go," Jake said. "You'll be recognized the moment you hit the main road," Roy said. "I'm just an old cowhand running an errand. Nobody looks twice." He stood up. "Let me do this one. You stay here and keep your women safe." Jake opened his mouth, closed it. Roy was already heading for the door with the particular satisfaction of a man who'd just won an argument by being obviously correct. "Your women," Lily repeated. "Roy has opinions," Jake said. "Roy is right," Lily said. Jake looked at her. That almost smile again, not fleeting. This time it stayed a full 4 seconds before he reined it in. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be complicated." "Every day since I met you has been complicated," she said. "Fair point," he said. And for 1/2 second before his face settled back into its habitual steadiness, she saw something in him that looked very much like a man who was glad about that. Howard Vance arrived on a Tuesday. He didn't come quietly. That was the first thing Lily noticed. He'd ridden into Caldwell with one of Pratt's men beside him and gone straight to the saloon and started talking. Roy's source at the saloon, the barkeep, who had apparently been supplying Roy with intelligence for a decade, sent word before noon. "He's saying you stole from him," Curtis reported to Lily wide-eyed. "Money from the household account. He's saying you took wages you weren't owed and that Mr. Walker doesn't know who he's married." Lily's hands were steady on the bread she was making. "What else?" Curtis hesitated. He's saying the marriage isn't real. that you followed Mr. Walker here and pressured him into it because you needed somewhere to hide." The kitchen was very quiet. "Where's Jake?" Lily asked. "He heard already. He's in the study." She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the study. Jake was standing at the window with his back to her. He heard her come in and turned around. His face was doing that thing that locked, controlled stillness that she'd learned by now wasn't emptiness, but the opposite of it. It was what Jake Walker looked like when he was full to the edge of something, and managing it very precisely. "You heard," she said. "I heard." He looked at her. "Did you take money from Vance's household account?" She held his gaze. "No." He nodded. Immediate no hesitation. "Then that's settled. Jake. Lily." He said her name the way he said decisive things, clear, no room in it for doubt. "I asked. You answered. That's the end of it." She stared at him. She'd been braced for she didn't know exactly. More questions. The particular skeptical quality that men got when a woman's word was all there was to go on. She'd been braced for having to explain herself further, to justify, to prove. He'd asked once and believed her. That was all. Something in her chest cracked open quietly and all the way. "He's going to be in town for days," she said, forcing her voice level. "Talking. Building a version of things that Pratt's people will repeat." "Let him talk," Jake said. "Roy gets back from Aldous tonight. If Crane has seen the letters before the hearing—" He stopped. Reconsidered. "Actually, we're not waiting for the hearing." She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm going to go talk to Vance myself." He said it calmly, the way he said everything, but there was something underneath the calm that she recognized now as the quality Jake Walker had when he'd already decided to do a hard thing and was simply waiting for the right moment to do it. "Jake," she said carefully, "if you walk into that saloon—" "I'm not going to the saloon." He picked up his hat. "I'm going to his hotel, alone. No witnesses. No performance for the street." He looked at her. "Howard Vance is a man who operates through reputation and distance. He tells stories about women who aren't in the room. I want him to look me in the eye and say what he's been saying to my face about my wife." The word again. My wife. Not the legal qualifier this time. Something else. "And if he does," Lily said, "then we both know exactly where we stand going into that hearing." He put on his hat. "And he knows who he's actually dealing with." She wanted to tell him not to go. She didn't, because it wasn't her place, and because she admitted to herself she trusted him. She trusted him in the particular way she'd stopped trusting anyone 3 years ago after Denver. The trust that wasn't blind or desperate, but was built on evidence, on a man who'd turned Pratt away 3 times, who'd sent Curtis to Rollins without being asked twice, who'd read 17 damning letters and responded by building a strategy instead of panicking. "Be careful," she said. Same words as the night of the fence. He looked at her the same way he had that night. "Always," he said. The end. He was back in 2 hours. She knew the moment he walked in that something had happened. Not violence, not disaster, but something significant. He had the look of a man who'd walked into a room expecting one fight and found a different one entirely. "He's scared," Jake said. He sat down at the kitchen table, which was not something Jake Walker did in the middle of the day. He sat down and put both hands flat on the table, and Lily sat down across from him, because whatever he was about to say required that. "I went to his room. I knocked. He answered. And the moment he saw me, not angry Lily, not confrontational, just standing there looking at him, he started justifying himself." Lily said nothing. Waited. "He knew," Jake said. "Everything he's been saying in town about you, about the marriage, he knows it's a lie. I could see it. He's been telling the lie long enough that he half believes it, the way men do when they've said something often enough. But when it's just one man looking at another man and asking him to say it to his face—" He paused. "He couldn't do it. He said the words, but he couldn't hold my eyes." "What did he say?" "He said Lily Hayes was a woman of bad character, who had made claims against him, and that the marriage to me was her latest scheme." Jake's voice was flat. "He said it to the wall beside my left shoulder." Lily felt the familiar cold of it, the particular exhaustion of a lie that had followed her for months, that she'd been carrying the weight of. And I told him that Margaret was here, that she had the letters, that Roy was at this moment sitting in Reverend Aldous' parlor with 17 pieces of correspondence that tied him and Pratt together in a conspiracy going back 8 months. Jake paused. I told him that Judge Crane had already been informed and that when the hearing happened in 11 days, Howard Vance had a choice. He could stand up in front of Crane and repeat what he'd been saying in the saloon with Margaret on the other side of the room, ready to contradict every word under oath, or he could get on his horse and ride back to Denver and let Pratt find another weapon. The kitchen was absolutely still. "What did he say?" Lily asked. "He asked if I was threatening him. And I told him I was informing him." Jake looked at her. "There's a difference. Threats are about what someone will do to you. Information is about what's already true. I wasn't threatening Howard Vance. I was telling him the facts of his situation and letting him make an informed choice." He paused. "He asked me to leave." "And Pratt," she said. "Pratt doesn't know yet. Vance won't tell him immediately he's going to spend the next 2 days trying to figure out if there's a version of this where he can still come out ahead. There isn't one, but he needs to discover that himself." Jake looked at his hands on the table. "When he figures it out, he'll either leave quietly or he'll tell Pratt everything, and Pratt will come at us harder than he has so far." "So we have 2 days," Lily said. "Maybe 3. To do what? To make sure everything we need is in place before Pratt finds out his witness is compromised." He looked up at her. "Roy needs to move faster with Aldous, and I need to file a formal counter-complaint with the county clerk, not just the water rights, but the fence destruction, the conspiracy evidence, all of it. On record. Before Pratt can get to the clerk first." "When?" "Tomorrow morning." She nodded. Her mind was already moving through logistics the way it always moved when there was a clear problem with a clear path, not planning exactly, more like reading the shape of the situation and finding the places to push. "I'll come with you," she said. "To the clerk. If this is about establishing the legitimacy of the household, the marriage, everything Pratt has been trying to undermine, then I should be standing there next to you when you file, not waiting at home." Jake looked at her. "It won't be comfortable. The clerk's office will be public. Pratt has people watching." "Good," Lily said. "Let them watch." Something moved in Jake's expression. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the kitchen 3 nights ago, with that open quality that wasn't soft, but was honest, the door a few inches wider than before. "You're not scared," he said. Not impressed, not surprised. Just noting something he found true. "I'm terrified," Lily said. "But being scared and backing down are 2 different things. I learned that a long time ago." He was quiet for a moment. "How long have you been fighting Lily?" The question was so simple and so direct that it went straight through every defense she had. She felt it in the center of her chest, that specific ache of a question that sees you accurately. "My whole life," she said. "It's just it used to always be alone." The word alone sat between them in the kitchen, and Jake Walker looked at her and didn't say anything for a moment. And then slowly, deliberately, he moved his hand across the table and covered hers. Not romantic, not urgent, just there. Solid and certain, the way Jake Walker did everything. His hand covering hers like a statement, like a fact, like the kind of thing he only did when he'd already decided he meant it. She looked down at their hands. She didn't move hers away. "You're not alone," he said, quietly. "Absolutely." She looked up at him, the lamp between them, again light and shadow. His face open in a way she knew he didn't show many people, possibly any people, and she understood in that moment that Jake Walker had not touched her hand lightly. That for a man who kept every door locked, putting his hand over hers at a kitchen table was the equivalent of anything else she could imagine. "Jake," she said. "I know," he said. "I know what I said. That I needed to be sure before I said things out loud." "And are you," she said, "sure?" He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "I've been sure for a while. I just kept waiting for it to make more sense than it does." "Does it have to make sense?" No, he said. I've decided it doesn't. She turned her hand under his, palm to palm. His fingers closed around hers, and she felt the whole weight of the past 3 weeks in that the fence and the clerk's office and Pratt's smile and the lamplit kitchen at 2 in the morning, and every almost smile she'd catalogued and saved without meaning to, all of it held between 2 hands on a kitchen table in Wyoming. One thing at a time, she said. Tomorrow we go to the clerk. We handle Pratt and Vance and Judge Crane. And after that, Jake said, we talk about what this actually is. Deal, she said. He squeezed her hand once, let go, stood up because Jake Walker was a man who made a decision and then did the next thing without lingering in the feeling of it. Get some sleep, he said. Third time he'd said those words to her. She'd noticed. You too, she said. Third time she'd said that back. He paused in the doorway. Didn't turn around. Lily. Yes, whatever happens in that clerk's office tomorrow, whatever Pratt does next. A pause. I don't regret any of it, not one day. He went. She sat at the kitchen table with her hand still warm from his, and she thought about a woman who'd stood at a water trough 3 weeks ago with 37 cents and no plan and a stubbornness that had kept her moving through every bad thing that had found her. She thought about how certain she'd been that morning in Caldwell that she was alone in the world. How completely certain. How long she'd been building her life around the truth of that certainty. She thought about how wrong she'd been. They went to the clerk's office at 8 the following morning. Roy had come back from Aldous the night before with good news. The Reverend had received them, had read the letters, and had sent a private message to Judge Crane before Roy had even finished his coffee. Crane had replied within the hour. He would hear the full case. He would arrive 2 days early. He would see the evidence first. The clerk's office was crowded by the time Jake and Lily got there, which meant word had moved fast. 3 of Pratt's men were visible on the street, not doing anything, just visible, which was its own kind of message. Jake walked past them without acknowledgement. Lily matched his pace exactly. The clerk, a thin, nervous man named Simmons, who'd worked the county records for 15 years, and appeared to have developed no opinions about anything. As a survival strategy, took one look at Jake Walker's expression and started pulling files before Jake had opened his mouth. Jake filed the counter complaint, every item. The fence destruction. Devlin's name, the letters, the connection to the county commissioners that Roy had identified. He filed a formal affidavit affirming the legitimacy of the Walker marriage. He filed a request for Crane's formal review of the water rights challenge. Simmons's hand shook slightly as he stamped each document. You understand, Jake said to him quietly, while Lily stood at his shoulder, that once these are filed, they're public record, accessible to any judge in the territory. Yes, sir, Simmons said, and that anything that happens to these documents, loss, misfiling, damage, would itself be a matter of public record. Simmons swallowed. Yes, sir. Good man, Jake said. They walked out. On the street, 2 of Pratt's men were now 4. They'd been joined by Devlin himself, who leaned against the post outside the hardware store and watched Jake with the flat, patient look of a man who did unpleasant work for money and had no strong feelings about it either way. Jake stopped on the boardwalk. He looked directly at Devlin. Tell Gerald, he said loud enough to carry, that it's filed. Devlin said nothing. Tell him everything's on record, Jake continued. Every letter, every payment, every name, he paused. And tell him Judge Crane arrives Thursday. He turned and walked to the wagon. Lily climbed up beside him. He took the reins. That was a declaration of war, Lily said quietly. No, Jake said, clicking the horse forward. That was the end of the war. Pratt just doesn't know it yet. She looked at the side of his face as they moved out of town. That jaw, that profile, that quality of absolute, unshakable certainty that she'd first read as coldness and now understood was something else entirely. It was the quality of a man who decided what was right and went toward it without flinching, regardless of what was in the way. She turned forward. The road north stretched out ahead of them, open and wide, the way Wyoming always was too big to hold small things. Jake, she said. Yeah? After Crane, after all of this. She paused. "What do you want? Not the ranch? Not the water rights? What do you want?" He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, without looking at her with the particular plainness he used for things that mattered, "You already know the answer to that." She looked at him. He kept his eyes on the road. She faced forward again. And for the first time in 3 weeks, maybe for the first time in years, she let herself think about what it would mean to stop moving, to stop surviving, to put down the weight she'd been carrying alone and simply stay. It terrified her. It absolutely terrified her. But it was the kind of terror that was also something else, something she had no better word for than hope. And it moved through her chest like the first warm day after a long winter, tentative and real and impossible to mistake for anything other than what it was. Behind them, Caldwell disappeared around a bend in the road. Ahead, the Walker Ranch waited, and Howard Vance, in a hotel room in town, was making a decision that would change everything, though not in the way he intended. Howard Vance made his decision on Wednesday night. Roy's source at the saloon sent word just after 9. Vance had paid his hotel bill, loaded his bags, and asked the stable hand to have his horse ready before dawn. He wasn't going to the hearing. He was leaving Caldwell the same way he'd arrived, quietly and under cover of other people's noise, which was the way Howard Vance did everything that mattered. Curtis brought the message to Jake at the kitchen table, where Jake and Lily and Margaret had been sitting with coffee and the careful, taut silence of people waiting for a thing to land. Jake read the note, passed it to Lily, said nothing. Margaret Vance read it over Lily's shoulder. Something moved across her face. Not relief exactly. Something more complicated. The particular expression of a woman watching a chapter of her life conclude without the dramatic confrontation she'd probably imagined on the long road from Denver. "He's running," Margaret said. "He's calculating," Jake said. "There's a difference. He thinks if he's not in the room, Crane can't compel his testimony. He thinks absence is protection." He looked at the note. "He's wrong." "How?" Lily said. "Because the letters don't need Vance present to speak. Margaret's testimony doesn't need Vance in the room to be credible." He set the note down. "And because a man who was paid to travel here and then fled the morning before a judicial hearing is not a man who looks innocent. Crane will notice the absence." Margaret put her cup down. "I'll be there," she said. "Whatever you need me to say, I'll say it. All of it." Jake looked at her. "Everything you're comfortable putting on record. I'm comfortable putting all of it on record," Margaret said, with the quietness of a woman who had spent 2 months alone making peace with exactly what she was willing to do. "Howard made his choices. I made mine. I'd like them both on record." Thursday came with the particular density of days that have been anticipated too long. Judge Harold Crane arrived in Caldwell at 11 in the morning and went directly to Reverend Aldis's house, which was exactly what Jake had predicted, and what Pratt apparently had not anticipated. By the time Pratt's lawyer, a man named Foss, who'd ridden up from Laramie, discovered where Crane had gone, Crane had been sitting with Aldis and the letters for 40 minutes. Roy reported all of this from his position at the barber's chair across from the Reverend's house, which was the most productive haircut he'd ever received. Jake didn't pace. That was one of the things about him that Lily had cataloged early and confirmed repeatedly. He didn't perform anxiety. He worked. While the morning moved toward the afternoon hearing, he checked the south fence repair, reviewed the filed documents one more time with the quiet focus of a man making sure every joint was tight before he put weight on it, and ate the lunch Lily put in front of him without being told. She sat across from him. "You're not eating," he said. "I'm thinking." "Eat while you think." She picked up her fork, set it down. What if Crane decides the letters aren't sufficient? What if Pratt's lawyer argues that Margaret's testimony is compromised because she's a woman who left her husband? Then I stand up and I make the argument that the letters are primary evidence and don't require corroboration, Jake said. Foss is good, but he's not in his home county. Crane knows this territory. He knows Pratt. He looked at her steadily. "We have the facts, Lily. Facts are harder to argue than feelings. Let Foss deal in feelings. We'll deal in facts." She picked up her fork again. Actually ate this time. "You've done this before," she said. "Stood in front of a judge. Once. 6 years ago. Pratt tried to challenge my father's original water rights claim while my father was dying." Something moved briefly across his face and then was gone. "I was 28. I had a stack of original survey documents and 3 days of preparation. Pratt had a lawyer from Cheyenne and a surveyor he'd paid." He paused. "The judge looked at the documents and the paid surveyor and made a ruling in 40 minutes. "You won," Lily said. "My father won," Jake said. "He died knowing the land was secure." He looked at his plate. "That's why I'll never let Pratt have it. It's not just the water rights. It's—" He stopped. "I know," Lily said quietly. He looked up at her. That open quality again, the door wide enough now that she could see straight through it. "I know you do," he said. Margaret appeared in the kitchen doorway with her coat already on. "It's time," she said. The hearing was held in the Caldwell Town Hall, which seated 40 people and had 60 in it by the time Jake and Lily and Margaret arrived. Small towns ran on spectacle and justice in roughly equal measure, and today offered both. Pratt was already there, seated at the front with Foss beside him. He watched Jake walk in with the expression of a man who had recalculated something and wasn't fully satisfied with the new number but hadn't yet decided to show it. When he saw Margaret Vance, something shifted in his face. Fast controlled gone. But Lily saw it. She'd gotten very good at reading the things men tried to hide. Jake sat at the respondent's table. Lily sat beside him. Margaret sat behind them, which was where witnesses waited, and the room arranged itself around the weight of what was about to happen. Judge Crane was 60 years old, compact and gray-haired, with the look of a man who'd heard every kind of lie a courtroom could produce, and had organized them into a personal taxonomy. He entered without ceremony, looked at both tables with equal dispassion, and opened the hearing. Pratt's case went first. Foss was skilled. Lily gave him that. He laid the water rights challenge out clearly, cited the original survey discrepancy, produced affidavits from 2 of the county commissioners whose names were also in Pratt's letters. He was building a clean, logical argument, and she could feel the room shifting slightly, with the weight of it, that particular audience physics, where a confident presentation moved people before they'd even evaluated the evidence. Then Crane held up one hand. "Mr. Foss," he said, "I'd like to address the matter of correspondence before we proceed." Foss paused. "I'm sorry. Correspondence." Crane produced the bundle of letters. Pratt's letters to Vance's replies, and set them on the bench in front of him, with the deliberate placement of a man who has been waiting to do something for a specific moment. "I received these 2 days ago through Reverend Aldous as a matter of civic concern." He looked at Pratt. "Mr. Pratt, would you like to tell me how your name appears in 17 letters coordinating the payment of a witness in this proceeding?" The room went absolutely silent. Pratt's face did not change. That was the remarkable thing, the control of a man who had been in difficult rooms before and knew that the moment your face changed, you'd already lost something. "Those letters," Pratt said evenly, "would require authentication." "They've been authenticated," Crane said, "by the handwriting on your filed county documents, which I pulled last night from the clerk's office. The same handwriting, same pen pressure, same formation of the capital G." He paused. "I'm not a graphologist, Mr. Pratt, but I've been a judge for 22 years, and I know what a man's handwriting looks like when it's his." Foss leaned toward Pratt. They exchanged a rapid, quiet exchange that the room couldn't hear but could absolutely read. Furthermore, Crane continued opening the top letter. "This communication, dated 8 months ago, explicitly instructs a Mr. Howard Vance to travel to Caldwell and provide testimony characterizing Mrs. Lily Walker as a woman of, and I'm quoting directly, demonstrably poor character and suspicious motive. A characterization Mr. Vance was to be paid $200 to deliver." He set the letter down. "Mr. Vance is not present today." "He was unable to attend," Foss said carefully. "He left town before dawn this morning. Crane said without inflection. I'm aware. His departure has been noted. He looked at Jake's table. Mr. Walker, you wish to respond to the water rights challenge. Jake stood. He spoke for 12 minutes. He was not a natural orator. He had none of Foss's fluency, none of the lawyer's smooth transitions. What he had was precision. He laid each document on the table, in order the original survey his father's filing the legal record of the previous challenge 6 years ago. And its outcome, the fence destruction report. With Devlin's name and the 2 witnesses who'd seen Pratt's men cut the wire. He laid them down one at a time, like a man building something that needed to hold weight. Then he said, "My wife will speak." Lily stood. She'd prepared what she was going to say, and then somewhere between the kitchen table and this room, she'd decided to put the preparation aside. Prepared things had the quality of prepared things, you could hear the seams. She told the truth instead plainly, and in order the way she'd told it to Jake at the kitchen table with the lamp between them. She told it without asking for sympathy, and without performing the hard parts. She said what Vance had done, and what he'd said afterward, and what those words had cost her across 4 months and 3 cities. She said it looking at Crane and not at Pratt, because Pratt wasn't the audience that mattered. The room was not silent the way rooms were silent when they were empty. It was silent the way rooms were silent when 40 people were holding their breath. Then Margaret Vance stood up without being asked. "Your Honor," she said, "I am Margaret Vance, Howard Vance's wife of 23 years. I would like to provide testimony." Crane looked at her. "You're not on the witness list." "No, sir," Margaret said. "I wasn't expected." She reached into her bag and placed a sealed envelope on the table in front of Crane. "That is a sworn affidavit prepared yesterday, notarized by Harold Fitch, who I believe you know. It corroborates everything Mrs. Walker has stated and adds details of my own direct observation." She paused. "I was present the night Howard Vance entered Lily Hayes's room. I heard what happened. I did nothing at the time because I was afraid." She stood straight. "I'm not afraid anymore." The silence this time had a different quality. It was the silence of a thing coming to rest after a long fall. Pratt spoke. He hadn't meant to. Lily could see it the way the words got out before his control caught them. "That woman has no standing, Mr. Pratt." Crane's voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. "You will not speak out of turn in my court." He looked at Foss. "Does your client wish to contest the admissibility of this affidavit?" Foss looked at Pratt. Pratt looked at the letters in Crane's hand. Something happened in his face. Then the first real crack in 22 years of managed surfaces. He looked for one unguarded second, like a man who understood that he'd lost. Not the hearing, not just the water rights. The whole architecture of power he'd been building in Caldwell County for a decade, brick by careful brick, and all it had taken to bring it down was 17 letters and 2 women who'd stopped being afraid. "No," Foss said quietly. "We do not contest." Crane ruled in 45 minutes. Walker water rights upheld. Water rights challenge dismissed with prejudice, meaning Pratt could not bring the same challenge again. Formal inquiry opened into the county commissioners named in the correspondence. Devlin referred for criminal prosecution on the fence destruction. The matter of Howard Vance and the paid testimony referred to the Territorial Attorney General. Gerald Pratt walked out of the town hall without speaking to anyone. Foss walked half a step behind him. Neither of them looked at Jake or Lily or Margaret as they passed. Roy, who had been sitting in the back row with his hat on his knee and the expression of a man who had been waiting 11 years for this particular afternoon, stood up and said simply, "Well." Curtis beside him looked like he might actually cry, which was 17 for you. Margaret Vance sat very still at the witness table for a moment after the room began to move. Lily went to her. She didn't say anything. She just sat beside her close enough that their shoulders touched, and Margaret put her hand over Lily's and held on for a moment. "All right," Margaret said finally, to herself as much as to Lily. "All right." They rode back to the ranch in the wagon, the 3 of them plus Roy and Curtis, And nobody said much because there was the specific exhaustion that followed a thing you'd been building toward for weeks, the particular flatness of aftermath that wasn't emptiness, but rest. The land moved past them wide and open and quiet. Curtis fell asleep against Roy's shoulder before they were 2 miles out, which Roy bore with the dignity of a man who had long ago made peace with the fact that he had a face. People felt safe sleeping near. Jake drove. Lily sat beside him on the bench. He said, "It's done." "Yes," she said. "Pratt won't recover from this, not in this county. The commissioner's inquiry alone." He stopped himself. "It's done," he said again, like he needed to hear it twice. She looked at the side of his face. He was tired. She could see it in the set of his jaw, the slight forward lean of a man letting some of the weight off. He'd been carrying the ranch and the water rights and the fight with Pratt for 3 years, and he'd been carrying this specific battle for weeks, and he was tired, and he looked like himself, exactly like himself, which was a man she had come to know in the specific and irreplaceable way you came to know someone when you'd been in the middle of something hard together. "Jake," she said. "Yeah." "You said after. After Crane, after all of it, we'd talk about what this actually is." He kept his eyes on the road. "I did say that." "It's after," she said. He was quiet for long enough that the wagon covered a 1/4 mile. She waited. She'd learned to wait for Jake Walker, not with the anxious waiting of someone uncertain of the answer, but with the particular patience of a woman who knew the man needed room to arrive at honest things in his own time. "I spent 3 years," he said slowly, "convinced that keeping everything locked was the same as keeping everything safe. The ranch, the water rights, my own." He paused. "Myself. I thought if nothing got in, nothing could damage what was already there." He glanced at her sideways. "Then you elbowed Gerald Pratt in the ribs in the middle of Main Street and looked him dead in the eye, and I stood there in the livery door watching you and thought, there she is. That's the person." He shook his head slightly. "I didn't know what I meant by it. I didn't let myself know. But that's what I thought." Lily's hands were still in her lap. "I told you the arrangement would end clean," he said. "No claims, no complications. I meant it when I said it. I believed it." He was quiet for a moment. "I stopped believing it around the 4th day, maybe the 3rd. "The bread," Lily said. He turned his head. "What?" "Roy said you'd never said, 'Where did you find her?' about anyone before. You said she found herself." She paused. "That was the 3rd day." He looked at her for a long moment. The horse kept walking steady and indifferent to human things. "You cataloged that." "I catalog everything," she said. "I have my whole life. It's how I survived." She held his gaze. "You're in the catalog, Jake. Every almost smile. Every time you said, 'Get some sleep.' Every time you called me your wife and meant more than the legal definition." He pulled the wagon to a stop. They were still a mile from the ranch gate, and Roy in the back didn't stir, and Curtis was completely asleep, and Margaret was looking out at the land with her own thoughts. Jake turned on the bench to face her. Full on the way, he did the hard things directly and without hedging. "I love you," he said. "I know the weight of that. I know what I'm saying. I'm not saying it because it's after and we agreed to talk about it after. I'm saying it because it's true, and I've been saying it to myself for 2 weeks, and it doesn't get smaller. The longer I hold it, it gets bigger, and I am done holding things that want to be said." Lily looked at him. The Jake Walker she'd met in the livery doorway had said maybe 4 sentences and offered them like they cost him something. This was the same man saying the thing that cost him the most, and saying it clean and clear and direct, because that was who he was underneath every locked door and every careful wall. "I love you too," she said. Not quietly, not tentatively. The way she'd said things since she was old enough to understand that saying things quietly meant people heard what they wanted instead of what you meant. "I came to your ranch with 37 cents and no plan, and I told myself every single day that this was temporary, that I was practical, that I knew the difference between what was real and what was an arrangement." She paused. "I was lying to myself by day 5, completely. No part of this has been an arrangement since the first morning I heard you tell Pratt to get off your land." Something broke open in Jake's face. Slow, like ice in spring, not dramatic, just inevitable. He reached up and put his hand against her face, his thumb at her jaw, and she felt the roughness of a working man's hand and the extraordinary care in how he held her like something he'd been afraid to touch in case it wasn't real. "Not pretending," he said. "Not pretending," she said. He kissed her. Not the rushed urgency of a stolen moment, not tentative, just fully present, fully himself the way Jake Walker did everything he'd made up his mind about. She put her hand over his, where it held her face, and kissed him back with the same complete honesty she'd been giving him since she'd told him about Vance at the kitchen table, and the wagon sat still on the Wyoming road while Roy pretended very convincingly to be asleep. When they separated, his forehead came down to rest against hers. He exhaled. "The rule," he said. "The one about not letting anyone—" "You broke it," she said. "I broke it." He agreed. He didn't sound like a man who regretted it. He sounded like a man who had put down something he'd been carrying too long and was breathing the particular relief of empty hands. 3 weeks ago, approximately. "Day 3, she said. He pulled back far enough to look at her. The almost smile was all the way a smile, now full, real, entirely unguarded, and it changed his whole face into something she hadn't yet seen and wanted to spend a long time looking at. "Day 3, he said. "The bread." "The bread," she confirmed. Roy from the wagon bed said without opening his eyes, "If you two are finished, the horse is getting bored." Curtis snorted himself awake, looked around, looked at Jake and Lily, turned so red that Lily felt genuinely concerned for the boy's health. Jake picked up the reins. He was still smiling. He kept the smile all the way to the ranch gate, which was the longest she'd ever seen it last, and she stored it in the catalog alongside everything else. The almost smiles, the quietness, the hand on hers at the kitchen table, the word wife said in 100 different registers until it meant something it had never meant before she arrived. Margaret Vance stayed 2 more weeks. She helped in the kitchen and took long walks in the afternoon, and one evening she told Lily very quietly that she'd written to her sister in Ohio and that she thought she might go there. Start over. She said it like a woman testing whether the idea could bear weight. "It can bear it," Lily told her. "How do you know?" "Because I started over 6 times, Lily said, "and this time it held." Margaret looked at her for a long moment. "He's a good man." "Yes," Lily said, simply, without qualification. "They exist," Margaret said. "I'd forgotten." She looked at her tea. "I'm glad you reminded me." The morning Margaret left, Curtis drove her to the stage in Rawlins with enough provisions for the journey that she'd laughed and said she wasn't crossing a continent. Jake shook her hand and thanked her formally, which was so exactly Jake that it made Lily love him more rather than less. Margaret embraced Lily at the wagon and held on for a moment. "Live well," Margaret said. "You too," Lily said. They watched the wagon go until it was gone around the bend. Jake stood beside her. After a moment, he put his arm around her shoulders, not dramatic, not announced. Just there the way he did everything that mattered. She leaned into him. "Roy wants to celebrate," Jake said. "He's been holding that bottle of whiskey for 6 years waiting for a suitable occasion. He's decided this qualifies." "Roy deserves a celebration," Lily said. "He does." Jake was quiet for a moment. "So do you." She looked up at him. "What does a celebration look like on a Wyoming ranch?" "Terrible cooking from someone other than you," Jake said. "Roy insists on cooking when he celebrates. He's very bad at it. We eat it anyway." A pause. "It's tradition." She laughed. He pulled her closer. "Lily," he said. "Yeah, I know we started this wrong. Wrong reasons, wrong circumstances, a practical solution to an impossible problem." He paused. "But I need you to know whatever comes next, however this goes forward, I want it to be real. All of it. Not the paper, and not the arrangement. You, here, choosing this." She turned to look at him fully, this man who had stood between her and every danger that had come for her. who had believed her once and never asked again, who said things plainly because he meant them to be understood. "I'm choosing this," she said. "I chose it when I didn't run from that water trough. I chose it every morning I got up and cooked breakfast and told myself it was just a job." She held his gaze. "I'm done pretending I didn't choose it. I chose you, Jake Walker. Every single part of it." He held her face in both hands and looked at her the way she had been quietly hoping someone would look at her for a very long time, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, and he was exactly where he was supposed to be, and neither of them had to pretend otherwise for a single moment longer. Lily Hayes had arrived in Caldwell with nothing but stubbornness and 37 cents, and she had built out of necessity and courage, and one elbow to Gerald Pratt's ribs, a life that was entirely, completely, irrevocably her own. And she was never not for one more day of her life alone.